wins, albeit probably not much because he doesn't do much defensively. But they are hoping some of their young players do grow, and I could see them being a pretty solid team this year, up to their standards at least, a solid team.
For a breakout player, I have Caris LeVert, who's 24 years old. He's a 6'7", small forward who last year he averaged about 12 points a game, 4 assists. He's improved his shooting percentage from the past few years. I think last year he shot at about 35%, and he showed flashes of being a very talented player. So he might be the player who kind of breaks out and becomes the leader on his team. So I would just argue that he's probably the player that has the most potential to break out in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I can't argue with that one. They have a few other young guys that they like. I know a lot of people are hoping, especially in Brooklyn, obviously, that D'Angelo Russell finally breaks out. And they do like Rondae Hollis-Jefferson as well. But both guys are playing for new contracts next year, so maybe one of those players will break out. But Caris LeVert is another guy who has a lot of potential and who could potentially break out. So won't argue with that one.
Okay, so Danny's going to move on with his trade idea.
So moving on to a trade idea, I have the Nets receiving Nikola Vucevic and Jonathan Simmons in exchange for Allen Crabbe and Rondae Hollis-Jefferson. And this is a move that helps them win next season, which for some reason I think the Brooklyn Nets are trying to really set a good culture there by winning. And these are two players who are still young but veterans at this point, who would help them win. And this is another trade to try to get extra money, additional money for the 2019 offseason. By getting rid of Allen Crabbe's contract, who is only 25 and a very solid three-point shooter. And his contract is worth $18 million next year. That's off the books. Not to mention Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, who is a restricted free agent next year. And his cap hold would be at about $7.5, $8 million. Now that's off the books as well. Now, Allen Crabbe and Rondae Hollis-Jefferson are obviously younger than Vucevic and Simmons. However, in order to get that cap relief, you got to make some kind of trade. You got to sacrifice something, which is what they're doing here. Now, like I just said, Vucevic and Simmons are both 29 and 28 respectively, to my knowledge. Maybe give or take a year here and there. They are still pretty young players, and they are very solid players. Nikola Vucevic is an unrestricted free agent next year, and Simmons has a non-guaranteed contract at just under $6 million. So the Brooklyn Nets could essentially decide whether they want to keep him or whether they want to get rid of his contract in the 2019 offseason if they want to open up more money. And this would really give the Brooklyn Nets a lot of money to spend in next year's offseason. And Simmons is also, like I said, a solid player. He had a very good year in Orlando. Played a couple solid years with the Spurs 2 years ago, so he has proven himself to be a productive player.
I mean, anything to free up that cap space is a good move to the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, they're very limited on the amount of trades they can make. So, I mean, if you get rid of that cap space, that's good. I mean, I know Brooklyn is just betting on this, and it might not end up working out. I mean, if one domino doesn't fall the right way, then the Nets are not in a good position, and they probably shouldn't have been betting on signing players. But, I mean, it's not like they're giving up anything that is that huge in this deal by losing Allen Crabbe and Rondae Hollis-Jefferson. So you do it, you get that cap space, and see if you can entice two free agents to come play with you.
Yeah, and that's the other reason, the other purpose behind this trade, that if they do strike out on free agents, all right, then you guarantee Simmons' contract and you bring back Nikola Vucevic, two very solid players, and you try to see who else you could bring in that's a second or a third tier free agent. So really this would potentially set them up for the future as well. Not in as good of a way as bringing in superstars, but nonetheless something that would help them compete for a playoff position in the future.
All right, so the next team we're going to look at are the Toronto Raptors with their new addition of Kawhi Leonard. Last year's Raptors record was 59 and 23, and this year, kind of surprisingly to me, Vegas actually has them winning less games, which is 55.5 is their over-under. I would bet the over on this for a couple of reasons. I do believe some of the teams in the East have actually gotten worse, so I do believe the Raptors are going to have more games to win. I think the addition of Kawhi Leonard, now this is obviously depending on if he's healthy or not, but I do believe the addition of Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green actually make the team a better team. And I do think that the Raptors are just going to win more games than 55. Now, I don't know if they're going to have more than 59 wins. I do think they'll be around the 59-60 win range. So I do think 55.5 would be a safe over for the Raptors to bet, unless, of course, Kawhi Leonard gets injured, or doesn't come back to the form that he was at prior to his injury. But if that doesn't happen, then I do believe that the Raptors are going to win more than 55.5 games.
I have the Raptors at 54 wins, so I'm taking the under. And the reason for that is not that I don't think they're going to be a bad team. I think they're actually going to end up being a real good team. But I think it's going to take them a while to adjust to one another. It's going to really take Kyle Lowry a few weeks to accept the fact that he's not playing with DeRozan anymore. And Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard both coming off of injuries and coming into a new system. It might take them some time before they start winning. And same thing, this team has a new head coach. And I think it will take them a while to adjust. And I think they'll play at 500 maybe for about the first 20 games before they really take off and really start going back to their old ways and probably even improve. But I think that first couple of weeks are really going to put a hurt into their record.
All right, the player I have as a breakout player is OG Anunoby, and it was pretty much a toss-up between OG and Pascal Siakam. I do think OG is the one that has a little bit more potential just because of he's still a little bit younger. We still don't know where he's at. He's a really good defender. He shot 37% from the three-point line last year. He can do a few things on the court, and I do think playing alongside Kawhi Leonard will make him a better player just because they play the same position. Obviously Kawhi is better built, but they are pretty similar in athleticism and size. So I do think OG Anunoby has a chance to come out this year, break out this year. I wouldn't argue that he's going to break out to be an all-star or even a 16-point-a-game scorer, but I do believe he's going to improve his game and be more of a important part on the Raptors team.
Yeah, the one thing here is that Shaka might get more minutes just because of their lack of depth with big men, and they have a pretty solid rotation with their wing players and their guards. Now, regardless of that rotation, Anunoby will be a big part of that rotation, but he might not get as many minutes. But I think like you said, he's got a little more potential, especially on the offensive end, and probably as a two-way player, I think he'll end up being the better player and contribute a little more than Siakam, who might just be more of a solid rebounder and solid putback player because of the fact that other players will get the ball over him.
Yeah, I mean, true. I just think that, the Raptors will be able to have an interesting lineup of both Anunoby and Kawhi out there. So I wouldn't be too much worried about his minutes. But again, Siakam's name did come up when I was thinking of this, so I'm not totally against him having a better breakout season. I'd actually would say that Siakam is going to have a better season than last year, and he's also going to improve his game.
All right, so for a trade that I could come up with for the Raptors was, again, Nikola Vucevic, because of their depth at the center position behind Valanciunas, who has suffered through some injuries in the past. I have the Magic trading away Vucevic for C.J. Miles, DeLon Wright, and the Raptors 2019 second-round pick. Now, DeLon Wright is a backup, now a third-string point guard in Toronto, but he is still pretty young, and he has performed in the past. He has proven that he could be at least a rotational player in the past. So a Magic need a point guard, need a young point guard. This is someone who could maybe go in and be a backup there behind DJ Augustine and maybe grow into something for the future. CJ Miles is a little older, but he did really shoot lights out from behind the three-point line last year. He could fill in that role for the Magic, and second-round pick is something that the Magic would be receiving in this deal. Probably wouldn't be a high pick, but still something that they could draft another player with. Vucevic is injury-prone, and he's got 1 year remaining on his contract. a very solid player when he's playing, but that's the problem, and that's why he might not receive as much as the Magic. I'm sorry, the Magic might not receive as much as they are hoping for in a trade for Vucevic. He might be worth 2 second-round picks at this point, so getting a player like Delon Wright, who is essentially similar to a second-round pick because he is still young and because he is pretty productive, and CJ Miles, who may be a little older but a rotational player, and you are getting a second-round pick, so this might be where his value is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're Toronto that you want pretty much a Jonas Valanciunas clone on the team. I know you keep bringing up the depth, but I don't know if I necessarily agree that they are limited at the center position because they do have Serge Ibaka, they do have Valanciunas, they do have Siakam, and the NBA is kind of moving away from a too big lineup, so I don't necessarily know if Vucevic would be the right fit. In this trade, you're not giving up too much. I mean, CJ Miles had an okay year. He did actually decline from his past performances and shooting percentage as well. So losing him might not be a big deal, especially since you did gain Danny Green, who's a much different player than CJ Miles, but he is a better defender, so he probably will be a little bit more useful. Using DeLon Wright wouldn't be the best thing to happen to them, but they do have 2 point guards already, so losing him wouldn't be that bad. I mean, I do worry about the Vucevic just because he's very similar to Valanciunas, and I don't know if you need another player like Valanciunas on the team.
Yeah, I guess I like this for the fact that he's starting to stretch the floor a little bit more than he has, and definitely stretches the floor a little more than Jonas Valanciunas. But like you said, I mean, this is something that Toronto Raptors aren't in much of a position to make a trade because of the fact that everyone they have is a part of their rotation and they shouldn't trade. And the players that they could trade are either a Norman Powell, who is on a pretty long contract, and other players like Serge Ibaka and Valanciunas are on bad contracts as well. So they're not in a good position to make any trade in general, and also the fact that they don't have their first round pick for next year. So we're going to move on to the Philadelphia 76ers.
All right, and the 76ers are at 52-30 last year's record, and this year they are projected to be at 54.5 wins. Now, I had a very difficult time trying to come up with if I'm going to bet the over or under in this. I'm actually going to bet the under. I do think that they did lose some depth in losing those players that really kind of helped improve the team when they went on their nice little run at the end of the year with Marco Bellinelli and the other guy who signed with the Milwaukee Bucks.
Ilyasova,
who I do believe he kind of helped stretch the floor for the team. Was able to get some good rebounds in games. So I do think that the lack of depth might hurt the team a little bit. I mean, they had an awfully good year with Joel Embiid staying healthy for most of the season. I mean, we all hope that he replicates that, but that also we're not sure if that happens. I mean, now I can be totally wrong on this if the reports are true that Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz both have become much better shooters that year than last year, because if that is true and they do stay healthy, there's a huge chance that they win more games. But right now, I would stay cautious and I would bet the under.
Yeah, I have them at 55 wins, so just over. Like you said, losing Bellinelli and Ilyasova are gonna have an impact, especially at the start of the year. Now, obviously, their hope is that Saric continues to improve the way he has, that Wilson Chandler could play the 3 and maybe Covington or him could split some time at the 4. They brought in Mike Muscala also to stretch the floor a little bit. All these guys are players who could shoot and stretch the floor, and that's what they're hoping, that they'd take over the same roles that Bellinelli and Ilyasova did. So depending on how these players perform, and obviously, like you said, depending on how, especially Markelle Fultz, because we pretty much know what we're going to get out of Ben Simmons. I mean, obviously, they're hoping to improve a little bit, but really how Fultz plays is what's going to determine whether they take the next step forward, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, if Ben Simmons has really improved on his jump shot and people have to come out and guard him now, then that's going to be a really, really deadly team because there's almost nothing that he won't be able to do. But that is a big if.
Yeah, and I think these reports should be taken with caution just because it seems every player right now could shoot. I mean, Andre Drummond is picking up a jump shot, so we'll really see how that works out.
Okay, so for the break.